Welcome to Talking Out Your Glass. I'm Sean Wagoner. Ariana Makau, founder of Nzilani Glass Conservation, was the second person in the world and the first woman to receive a master's degree in stained glass conservation from the Royal College of Art in London. Equally comfortable on a job site, at a board meeting, or in a museum, Makau has over 30 years of experience with art and architectural preservation. Her work is most fulfilling at the intersection of equity, preservation, and art. Nzilani Glass Conservation is an award-winning firm and one of the few companies in the United States qualified to create new or preserve historical glass works. Makau's company specializes in architectural art glass, providing safe, museum-quality services for private residences, historic buildings, and museums. Collaborating with high-end metal and woodworkers, engineers, and general contractors to solve unique problems, Nzilani's creative solutions pair old-school fabrication with modern techniques. With core values, be safe, have fun, do excellent work, Nzilani leads the industry in best practices for protection from lead exposure, with the idea that being aware of your environment frees one to do their best work and have fun while doing it. Working with stained glass requires following strict protocols regarding environmental safety, the proper handling of hazardous materials such as lead and asbestos, and a profound knowledge of structural integrity during fabrication. Says Makau, as the recognized leader in the field, we adhere to the most current Cal/OSHA health and safety standards throughout all processes. It is a cornerstone at Nzilani and our highest priority to maintain the health and safety of our employees, clients, contractors, and all those who come in contact with the windows. This includes, but is not exhaustive of, material testing to identify hazards, sealing off of active areas and the work therein by certified contractors, and the use of proper personal protection, PPEs, by our team. Approachable and non-judgmental, Makau enjoys sharing her professional experience in classrooms, public talks, and national conferences that bridge the gap between health and safety regulators and those involved in stained glass. She is also the executive director of the Fillet Foundation, which she founded in 2024, that brings underserved people and overlooked places to the forefront of preservation. Her work experience spans numerous museums in the U.S. and abroad, including the V&A, the Met, SF MoMA, and the Getty Museum. Makau has served on the board of the Stained Glass Association of America, is a fellow of the American Institute for Conservation, and a current board member of the Western chapter of the Association of Preservation Technology. As the interim Collections CARE Director of Destination Crenshaw from 2023 to 2024, Makau ensured Southern California conservators were ready for future conservation efforts involving interns, documenting public art pieces as they are installed, ensuring their ongoing maintenance is considered from day one, and creating a framework for workforce development opportunities under the umbrella of art preservation to be highlighted for the next generation. Makau states, one of my major goals is for people to reframe preservation to be considered parallel to the fabrication of new work, and that preservation can also be applicable to place and people. Many thanks to the sponsors of this episode of Talking Out Your Glass: the Stained Glass Association of America, Toyo Supercutters, Yakagani Glass, Ed Hoy's International, the American Glass Guild, and Bentime. To find out more about our sponsors, visit talkingoutyourglass.com. Click on Episodes, Season 11, and Ariana Makau. Ariana Makau, thank you so much for joining me on Talking Out Your Glass podcast.
Thanks for having me.
You've said that you fell in love in Paris, not with a person, but a thing. That's where you fell in love with stained glass?
It is.
You followed your newfound passion to the Royal College of Art in London, where you became the first woman to earn a master's degree in stained glass conservation. Mm-hmm. Talk about the master's program and the impact of being a trailblazer in glass.
Well, the impact on me and the program was a life changer, frankly. Previous to doing that course, I obviously was really interested in stained glass and didn't really, know how I was going to apply it to my life, or if that was going to be a path that I could take as a profession. But I had an experience over the summer at the Getty Museum working in antiquities conservation, and that's where I was introduced to the idea of conservation, which incorporated art and art history and hands-on work and science and making things better for public consumption. And then looked into this program where they took one student every 3 years to be integrated into the Victoria and Albert Museum conservation department. Unfortunately, the program no longer exists. There's one that's in York, but this program combined working at the Victoria and Albert Museum, and the degree came from the Royal College of Art. So it was this really lovely sweet spot where I was working with all these other artists in different disciplines at the Royal College of Art, and then spending a lot of my my time at the Victoria and Albert Museum. And the stained glass department was actually rather small at that time. It was just my tutor, who was the head of stained glass conservation, and myself. And so from almost day one, I was doing hands-on conservation work, and it was a 3-year program. So I really learned a lot of detail work, documentation. I had the luxury of spending time to do research and history and all of the pieces that I was working on. And then the fact that you can hear from my accent now that I'm American, the fact that I was in London and was able to go to Europe and study and tour around. I spent some time in Holland as well, looking at their stained glass was amazing, to the point of being a trailblazer. I'm just me, right? So when I was doing that, I wasn't thinking of it as, I'm the first anything doing it. I was just Ariana pursuing something that I loved, and I thought it was really interesting. And so it wasn't until, in retrospect, that I learned what an amazing opportunity it was, and something that's sort of been a through line in my whole profession has been wanting other people to have that opportunity as well.
Before founding your studio, Nzilani, you worked at the J. Paul Getty Museum in Los Angeles, London's V&A Museum, and the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art. How did those experiences prepare you for what you're doing now?
The experience of working in museums, I really appreciate the fact that I had that opportunity and that experience, because it drove how I established Nzilani as being a differentiator from maybe some other stained glass companies that had come up from purely hands-on craft experience. We're really strong in documentation. We're really strong in health and safety and how we approach projects. And then I worked at one other studio prior to starting Nzilani. Well, I've worked at a couple of studios before starting Nzilani, and it was definitely an uphill journey the first couple of years, figuring out how do we incorporate museum grade conservation to real world applications. But now, we're a few decades in, and so I think we've got this really great sweet spot where we really provide a lot of insight into what we do with our clients. We really think about them as collaborators, and not I guess what I always say is, like, we pull back the veil from what we do, right? So I think sometimes when you're working in a museum, there's this mystique and imposed or self-imposed hierarchy where conservators, there's only a few people who know what we do, and no one else can even understand what we do because we've gone through so many years of training, all of which can be true. But I think in many cases, we should give more benefit of the doubt to the general public if we take the time to share the work that we're doing and the reasons behind the approach to conservation or preservation work. It's clear, right? They don't need to know the chemical breakdown of what the solvents were that we used to understand why we use them and the reasons behind our approaches to conservation work. So I very much am grateful that I have worked in a museum or multiple museum spaces, and I can still speak museum. But I also take great pride in sharing that language and being a translator with the general public.
So what inspired you to establish Nzilani Conservation, and what were your early goals for the studio?
It was through, I would have to say that the inspiration in part was due to support of friends and family. So the trajectory was, I worked at the Getty Museum prior to going to grad school. I went to grad school, I worked at the Met, and then I came back to California. I'm a native Californian, and so I kept a connection with the Getty while working at another stained glass studio. And then I started having, because I had these museum connections, I started having museums reach out and asking if I could do small term conservation work. And I was lucky enough that the studio that I worked at, I wouldn't say allowed me, but I had some flexibility so I could do work on my own. And I started to build up this reputation. So in part, it was just continuing the work I'd always been doing. It got to a point where it was apparent to me that I had enough work that I could start my own business. At the same time, I had friends who were saying, I was like, I don't know if I should make this leap. It seems kind of daunting. And I had friends saying, you should just do it. What the worst that could happen is it doesn't work out, and then you can, work somewhere else. So I definitely value and appreciate the friends who were saying, make that leap. And I would say for anyone starting a small business, you really do have to have that inner core of, I'm gonna do this and hopefully it'll work out, even if I don't know how it's going to work. But the other thing was, I really did enjoy doing the historical background of pieces. I really did enjoy doing the documentation aspect. And so part of that, it was not what I was exposed to in any of the other studios that I worked in. And I really did want to continue that work. And so I sort of used these projects that were coming to me to make them a stepping stone to start my own business.
Well, tell us about the Nzilani name.
Yeah, so I come from multiple backgrounds in heritage. My mom is English and German heritage, and my father is Kenyan. And in his family background, you're given one name when you're born and another name when you come into your own. It's not an age decision. It's when your parents decide you are kind of who you are. So when I got my master's in stained glass conservation, my father gave me my second name, which is Nzilani, and that's the name of my grandmother. And I thought it was a really great way to honor her and also distinguish myself from other people by having a name that's Kenyan. It's a really great litmus test too, to see if people are curious about the name, ask how it's pronounced if they don't know already how to pronounce it. And then if I get a pushback of, oh, that's really hard, it's really difficult to say, I say, well, can you pronounce Rachmaninoff? Can you pronounce Tchaikovsky? That it's a lot easier than that.
That's a good
right?
point.
So, yeah.
Well, tell us about the studio and its many offshoots.
Yeah, so the studio has lots of different aspects that we do. At our core, it's in the name, Nzilani Glass Conservation. And And I think if I was starting off now and naming the company, it would probably be Nzilani Glass or Nzilani Glass Preservation, because I feel preservation is a bigger bucket than conservation. It's sort of a callback to me talking about conservation being it can be exclusive, whereas preservation, I think, has it's more enveloping. So I would say, 80-85% of the work that we do is preservation work. So we're working on windows that exist already and making sure that they will continue to exist into the future. Sometimes those are panels that are coming from museums, that are 300-400 years old, and we're doing museum conservation work, though the majority of work that we do are for residential homes or monumental buildings, where we go and take the windows out of their architectural setting. They come back to the studio. We document them, conserve them. In general, by the time we're taking them out, they have to be completely rebuilt. But we currently have a piece in the studio right now, which is a Tiffany piece, Louis Comfort Tiffany piece, that is from 1913. And the nature of Tiffany windows, as the layering effect is one of the prime distinguishing features of a Tiffany window. So we just stabilized that piece. There was no reason for us to take all of those layers apart and relayer everything. And then, of course, we reinstall the windows back in place. We also work on glass objects. We have ceramic pieces that we work on as well. And then the flip side is we work on new pieces. So occasionally we're asked to commission, or we're commissioned to do new pieces based on whatever our client's fancy is. And that's really exciting for us, because as part of our preservation work, we're always trying to be invisible. And that means that we're trying to match techniques of the stained glass artists from before. And because of that, we kind of have this really wide palette of techniques that we can do. And it's nice to sort of use that as a basis and then become really creative with the new work that we do.
We'll return to Ariana Makau in just a moment. This episode of Talking Out Your Glass is sponsored by the Stained Glass Association of America. Since 1903, the Stained Glass Association of America has cultivated a growing community of members across the U.S. who share a passion for art glass. Whether you've recently discovered the beauty of leaded, stained, or ornamental glass, or you've been practicing the craft for a lifetime, SGAA welcomes you to join the oldest and most vibrant membership organization dedicated to the illumination of stained glass. Learn more and become a member or subscribe at stainedglass.org. This episode of Talking Out Your Glass is sponsored by Toyo Super Cutters, preferred by glass artists worldwide. Toyo is distributed by Glass Accessories International on the web at glassaccessories.com, where you can check out the entire line of professional quality Toyo glass cutters. Find your long-lasting cutter in a color and handle style that meets your needs at an authorized Toyo dealer. Now on Instagram at Toyo Super Cutters. This episode is sponsored by Yakagani Glass, manufacturer of the world's finest art glass, celebrating their 50th anniversary in 2026. Follow them on Facebook and Instagram to be the first to hear about their limited edition anniversary glass products and celebrations planned throughout the year, beginning with the formulation of their new gold pink replacement color. Tristan and Leanne would like to express their immense gratitude to the art glass community for their support and patronage throughout the years. Thank you from the crew at Yakagani Glass. For more information, visit yakaganiglass.com. And now, we return to Ariana Makau. You discovered there were few women of color in stained glass. A couple of years ago, you founded the Fillet Foundation to help the underserved find roles in the restoration and conservation trade. Tell us about it.
The reason I chose to name it the Fillet Foundation is when I first was learning about stained glass in the UK, they described the border pieces of sacrificial glass that go into medieval stained glass windows. And then became incorporated as a design style further on when they were really necessary. They were referred to as fillets. They're also called sacrificial borders. And the reason they're called that is that it's a very thin border of glass, sometimes not even painted, even if you have a very distinctive, beautifully painted main section. And it's what anchors the glass in historic stone or cement acting as stone, a U-channel for the window. So if you want to remove it quickly, you would just smash these borders and take the quote unquote good part of the window out. And then you would replace those pieces when you were putting the window back in. And my argument or my championing of these pieces is that I think it's very reflective of artists and also people who work in preservation, hands-on preservation, trades work. When you are thinking about converting a building from something that was, an old mill or, some industrial building, and it gets converted into a beautiful new repurposed loft or a restaurant or a living space, quite often when you go into this new space and it's beautifully refurbished, there is this disconnect where people say, oh yeah, it used to be a mill and now it's this great place. But you don't think about all the people and the hands that were invested into getting it to that place or converting it into that place. And similarly, I think of artists incorporating our work into the larger community. We are the anchors, right? We're anchoring the art to the greater community, and yet we're thought of as being interchangeable and replaceable, and our value is not thought of as, you see the artwork, which is the good part of the window, in larger society, which is the building, but you don't think of us as being the bridges to that work. So I'm very passionate about that, and that's the reason I called the nonprofit the Fillet Foundation.
So how does the Fillet Foundation help the underserved find roles in restoration and conservation trades?
Well, in full transparency, we are early days yet. We're just coming up on our second year of existence. That said, I could also say we're coming up in our, almost 25th, 30th year of existence, because the act of doing what I do and being a quote unquote unicorn, unusual person in my trade, by nature of just being and bringing awareness of who can do the work. That is a through line of the Fillet Foundation. And our mission statement is bringing underserved people and overlooked places to the forefront of preservation work. So even though we're new, I have been doing the core work of the Fillet Foundation through speaking engagements at schools and in conferences. Every time I'm having a conversation, frankly, with a potential new client, coming forward and having a conversation with them. Quite a few years back, I had a very interesting conversation with an organization that will remain nameless, but they reached out and said, we have this window that needs to be a very large historic window that needs to be conserved. And I said, okay, we can do it. And then they said, well, how are you going to work on this? It's such a big window. So they didn't even understand that it was comprised of multiple panels. And I said, well, why don't you come to the studio and see what we do? So they came and did a tour. And at the end of the tour, they said, well, you're obviously very accomplished and you understand what needs to be done, but you seem really young. So we're a little hesitant. And my response was, well, I have a lot of other clients who don't seem to see my youth as a hindrance, and I can't alter how I look. And at that point, I would like to stress that I was pushing 40, so I really wasn't that young. And I said, if this is a deterrent for you, I can't alter that. And you know where the door is. Let's not waste each other's time. Because there are people who we can work with who don't have that issue. And then there was this pushback of, well, that's not what we said. And I said, well, I was here, you were here, there's 5 people here who all just heard the same comment. So I think that's an action that we do. But tangibly, what the Phillip Foundation does, we, right out of the gate, we paired with another nonprofit that is local to us. They're based in West Oakland, called Rising Sun Center for Opportunity, who trains folks in construction work and the energy conservation field as well. And they had a program called Women Build the Bay. So we thought it was really good for us to pair with them. And I recommend it anyone who's thinking of starting a nonprofit or running a nonprofit. I think I did a lot of research before I formally launched the Phillip Foundation. And one of the things that I learned with successful nonprofits is you don't reinvent the wheel. You find really good partners to work with. And Rising Sun was a really great example for us. So they had already built this infrastructure, and we offered the opportunity for them, some of the participants, to come tour the studio, just so they had the understanding of, like, if you're interested in being a glazing contractor, here's another path you might consider, and how you can apply glazing to construction work. And we do stained glass conservation and preservation. So the whole group came and toured, and then we just bought a building, which is a block away from where we currently are. And I said, and we just bought this new building, and the building happens to have these beautiful old steel sashes with plexiglass in them. I don't know where the previous owner decided to put plexiglass in them, but cut horribly. And this is a place where we would love to train you, or at least give you a hands-on experience in removing this old plexiglass and putting in new glass. And the group was close to 30 women and gender expansive folks. And we thought maybe we'd have a handful of people who were interested in doing this experience. And I was overwhelmed that every single person wanted to do the project. So because the goal was, start slow and go with what you know. But I also didn't want to present this opportunity and say, oh, I'm sorry, only 7 of you can do this. So we had to really think quickly on how do we pivot everything to give everyone the opportunity to do this. And so we pulled in more Nzilani people to partner with folks, and we're able to get everyone who is interested to do some hands-on experience. And I think I don't want to say I'm proud of this, because it's not me, it's the person, but by giving so many people that experience, there were a few people who said, this really scratches all my itches. I would like to learn more. And it just so happened that Nzilani was we got more projects happening while this training program was going through. And so those folks, we put them through a rigorous interview process with some other people who weren't going through the program. And the person who rose to the top, to the best of their own abilities, was someone from that training program. And I have to keep on reminding myself they've only been here for like 6 weeks, because they've fully integrated into the team. And it's not just me. Every single person in our organization has said, this is the best hire we have ever had. So it really shows that if you give people access to the understanding of what the preservation trades are, they'll rise to the top. So it's a really great counter to people saying, oh, it's a dying art, no one wants to do it anymore. It's that a lot of people don't know that it exists as a profession. a very long answer, but obviously I could talk about it forever.
Well, another area that you have a passion for and you've spent a lot of time on is safety in stained glass. Tell us a bit about the ways that you've educated others about safety standards and the importance of doing that.
Yeah, I think, again, stained glass is sort of this weird beast, right? Because I can't even count how many people have said, oh, I did stained glass. I did a stained glass course or class in the summer, or I did something in school. And I think what they really, the entree to that is usually the Tiffany or copper foil technique, which is great and fine. And I think since it came up as a craft, especially the resurgence, at least here on the West Coast in the 70s, where there wasn't so much focus on safety, it's sort of like, well, if my initial teachers didn't tell me, or my initial experience wasn't talking about safety, then it's fine. And I think there's also this false sense of bravado with some people who have been in the profession for many decades, and they, like, I'm still here, I'm fine, so it's not a problem. But I pride myself in always wanting to learn more, and when I get more information, then I adjust my expectations. And so obviously, coming from a museum environment through my first training, there was a health and safety element, because that's sort of a nature and a through line of museums. And then I sort of continued that when I started my own company. So I've made it my mission to understand what the expectations are for health and safety. So at Nzilani, the very first day someone works for us, we pay for them to do a BLL, which is a blood lead level test, then every 2 months up until 6 months. And then they get sort of lined up with the rest of the team, and the team gets tested every 6 months until the last day that folks work for us. We pay for them again to do an exit BLL test. In California, which has some of the highest safety regulations, I, as an employer, am responsible for 30 years past the last day that someone works for Nzilani for their health. And so in part, it's to protect the team members so they understand what their exposure levels are. And in part, it's to protect me or the company, to say, like, look, we have these records, and these are all the PPEs, the personal protective equipment that we've provided for our team to make sure everyone is safe. We also, because of the largeness of the projects that we work on, and to be considered to work on large historical buildings, everyone is a certified lead worker and also a certified asbestos worker, because often the sealants around the windows have asbestos in them. When I am advising folks in other states, I also tell them what the regulations are here. Sometimes it's not applicable in the state that I'm working in, but I am an advocate for, if we're doing a project anywhere, these are what my expectations are. And I find that the more that people know about what the health and safety exposure limits are and how they apply to them as a person, they want to do well. And also the other construction, the general contractors want to do well. Like, no one wants to expose people unnecessarily to health and safety risks. The counterpart to that, though, is I think there needs to be more of an infrastructure to support people to do the right thing. I've had the luxury and the privilege to be able to maintain my company to adhere to that. When I was first starting off, I didn't have that bandwidth or that, have the reputation and insight to counterbalance a client who said, well, I don't think I really need that. And there also have been jobs where Nzilani has been outbid by other companies who don't adhere to that, most likely because they don't know about all the things that they need to do, or a client wants to do right, but they don't have the funds to cover everything. So I really feel like there's this disconnect where if people were given grants, or there should be more of a universal foundation for adhering to people's health. So the only barriers are barriers of education and not monetary barriers. Because it can be extremely frustrating, and I have to say, even for myself, when you have regulators who don't really understand what stained glass is, and they're trying to impose this blanket exposure level or blanket health and safety rules, but they don't understand how we work. It just doesn't work. Like the first advisor we had was so shocked that we had lead came in the studio. He basically was saying like every day we had to work in one of like the boy in the bubble from the 70s and 80s,
Yeah.
And I was like, you don't, and he was like, oh, you have to record every time you cut yourself. And I was like, we work with glass. We're always going to have a little nick. Like obviously if someone needs stitches, yes, right? Like we take care of them, but just this misunderstanding of what we do and what artists do with this very rigid application of health and safety doesn't serve either group, So I try to provide as much education as possible, and that's another arm of the Phillip Foundation is we have a whole page of health and safety, including a PDF that you can download in both English and Spanish, and I also want to have a translation into French, so people can really understand at the very basic level what they need if they're working with stained glass. And obviously with older pieces, there's a lot more consideration for exposure as opposed to working with copper foil or a new lead.
We'll return to Ariana Makau in just a moment. This episode of Talking Out Your Glass is sponsored by the American Glass Guild, a nonprofit organization whose core mission is to work toward building an environment within the craft that both cultivates novices and facilitates experienced craftspeople and artisans to attain a higher level of expertise. AGG is an inclusive organization that actively seeks the participation of all people with an interest in decorative glass, its creation, preservation, and restoration. Their annual conference is a great way to receive education, make connections, and see the latest in the art glass world. Visit AmericanGlassGuild.org for more information. This episode of Talking Out Your Glass is sponsored by Ed Hoy's International. Ed Hoy's International is the single source for all your art glass needs, serving all levels of customers from retail to wholesale. The company offers an expansive selection of sheet glass, tools, classes, and supplies from all major suppliers, including Bullseye, Wismach, Kokomo, Yakagani, and Oceanside Glass. For more information, visit edhoy.com. This episode is sponsored by Bentheim, a leader in specialty architectural glass and the exclusive supplier of Lambert's mouth-blown glass in America. Bentheim is the preferred choice by artists and architects across the nation. For more information, visit bentheim.com. And now, we return to Ariana Makau. And am I remembering correctly, you worked with the Stained Glass Association of America on their board in terms of as a safety advisor?
Yeah, I was there. I was on the board for a few years and was a health and safety chair. And still am, available to them should they have any questions about health and safety. And one of the things that I offer / Nzilani offers is, even if we're not going to do the work, there's enough work for everybody. I'm happy to offer my services as an advisor and an advocate for both, the preservation of windows in a building, and also an advocate for, health and safety. I must stress, I'm not a site hygienist. I don't have that qualification, but I can definitely speak to what the needs are of people working in stained glass in a preservation field. And I from doing all of my research, I can connect people to, local facilities and the questions that they need to ask in order to be safe.
Ariana, you said one of my major goals is for people to reframe preservation to be considered parallel to the fabrication of new work, and that preservation can also be applicable to place and people. Explain.
Sure. I think often people think about artists being on one side of this invisible fence of making new things and being somewhat cavalier about health and safety, and then preservationists. I think often people think about older, frankly, white people and having access and luxury and time to work on preserving things, and preservation equates with history, equates with old. And there are old white artists and there are young people of color in preservations. And the more we can blur those lines, I think it's really important for the continuation of preservation and also the continuation of new work. So when we're doing new projects, we approach them with a preservation lens. And people who work in public art, I think, are more aware of this now. Often in the RFPs, the request for proposals, there is a line item there to work with a conservator, right? So you're thinking about, when you create this beautiful new work of art, how is it going to be preserved? Are the materials you're using applicable to the longevity of your piece? Now, in some cases, artists intentionally build something to corrode and fall apart over time, right? That's the through line of their art. I'm not saying don't do that, but if you want something to look as beautiful and be as structurally sound as the day you installed it, 10, 20, 30, 100 years into the future, then you should start thinking about the preservation aspects of it from the beginning, to prop up that and support that new work. And then parallel to that with preservation work, preservation is not just taking care of old buildings. Preservation, especially in the current climate that we're in, is preservation of history. And that can be an oral history, that can be a piece of clothing that your grandmother made for you, that can be a story that's really relevant to your neighborhood. Maybe there's something in a rural neighborhood that people are moving away, and the last person who has that story, no one has recorded it or written it down or talked to it. So there's this oral history being carried on through work. So I think we need to start thinking about a broader scope of what are we preserving, and part of it is tangible and part of it is intangible, and all of those things are relevant to continue this great conglomerate of artistic places, things, stories, and ideas.
So what is the difference between conservation and restoration? And maybe we should throw preservation in there too.
Yeah.
How do they all three work together?
Yeah, how do they? It's somewhat of there is some overlap, right? So conservation, you're conserving what remains, what exists now. So you don't reinvent anything that is missing. Restoration restores an object back to its original functionality. And then preservation preserves what is existing but may incorporate a little bit more of what was missing. And especially with stained glass, if you're thinking about stained glass windows in an architectural setting, we kind of dip into both conservation and restoration. One of my ubiquitous phrases is, we can spend months matching, glass and doing in painting, so you don't see that there's any paint loss of this window. But if that window goes back in and it leaks during the first rainstorm, no one cares about that 6 months of in painting and color matching, because the window is leaking and there's a puddle on the floor, you see leaks in the wall. So one of the things that I really love working with stained glass as my preferred medium is the fact that it has to integrate both the architectural structure of a building and then also speak to the artistry of the window. So for us specifically, that's why I said if I was renaming or starting my company now, it would be preservation rather than conservation, because we touch on all different aspects.
So give us an example of a challenging or rewarding Nzilani conservation project.
Every project that we're working on is like the most exciting, but one that really was challenging that we worked on was a stained glass dome that was 10 feet in diameter. And when we looked at it closely, it ended up really being a chandelier, and it was inverted. So instead, you envision a dome having the arch being at the top if you're looking at the cross section, but this one had the arch on the bottom. So from the very beginning, gravity was not its friend. This was it was fabricated in 1918 originally. It was set into a steel frame that was hanging really precariously, we discovered, in an attic. So we had to re-engineer the hanging steel structure. We couldn't take the steel down. We had to do it in place because there was a decorative plaster filigree right under it. So we had 2 inches of play. So every time we would take out one panel, at the beginning of the project, we would take out one panel, it would pivot. And so we had to make sure that it wouldn't pivot further to hit the plaster filigree. And then just rebuilding the whole structure in that 3-dimensional multi-curve piece. We had to build cradles. Folks who work in stained glass on curved pieces understand that you have to do a concave and a convex surface on which to build. And we worked with architectural metalsmith workers to further support the dome and integrate that into the hanging structure. So that was really challenging. And then we actually had a revisit of that project recently, in that the church called us up and said, we think there's a piece that's hanging out of it. What do we do? And this was a structural support bar that was originally built to go this way. So also with conservation and preservation, you want to use all the original materials and not reinvent the wheel unless there's a structural issue to it. And what we realized was that we had put a plastic cover over the top of this in the attic because they also had pigeons and vermin running in there periodically, and they also didn't have enough funding to treat the actual roof when we first put the stained glass back in. And they had changed their music program. So they were using drums and an electric guitar with a really large amperage. And that plastic formed a drum, and the vibrations from the amp were causing the support bar to slowly migrate out of place. And so we went back and fixed that. But I thought it was really interesting thinking about repurposing building spaces that I'm sure when that building and the stained glass, or this dome, this leaded art glass piece was built, they never in their wildest dreams would have envisioned someone with an amp right underneath it moving the air enough to move components of this window. So yeah, that it was a shocking and kind of scary discovery, but also just sort of interesting thinking about people in place and repurposing place. So that was a really fun project to do.
So what are some of Nzilani's high points or exciting restoration projects?
You mean in the past or what we're working on now?
Well, let's talk about what you're working on now.
Yeah.
I know those are always the most fun.
Yeah. So everyone says, what's your favorite one? I'm like, the one we're working on now. Well, this Tiffany project for Crystal Bridges is really exciting, just because it's an Agnes Northrop landscape piece, and she was really prolific and well known in Tiffany Studios for her designs. So it's really nice to work on a design by a woman, and sort of have this through line of like originally designed by a woman and then have a woman-owned company working on the piece. It's also really interesting because it's moved around a couple times, and it's a 9-panel piece that's 9 feet by 8. It's substantial. So it was originally in Omaha, Nebraska in 1913, in a Woodsman of the World building at the top of a marble staircase, and then it moved, I believe in 1932, early 30s, to San Antonio, Texas. And then it was deinstalled last year. It's been in our studio since for conservation work, and then it'll go to Crystal Bridges Museum in Arkansas next month. So that's been really exciting, both in the conservation of it, but also thinking again about architecture, because the steel frame, the original steel frame, moved with the panels. So it's this hollow core steel frame with brass, decorative and functional brass components on both the exterior and the interior, and it's got hundreds and hundreds of different size screws that we've been replacing and when needed, because some of them broke off, and then preserving and just noting how everything goes together. It's not intuitive. It's sort of like this crazy Jenga piece that goes together. That's been super exciting, just trying to figure out how everything goes together. And then also for me, it's fulfilling a lifelong dream of my Don Quixote moment, of being a really strong advocate for light being a primary and key component in stained glass. Especially when you're looking at stained glass windows that are put in an environment where they're not interacting with native light. I've always felt that looking at stained glass in a museum where the light is stagnant or the wrong light tonality is really doing a disservice to the windows. For a brief time before I was into stained glass, I was really into filmmaking and considered going down the route of being a cinematographer. And if you think about it, it's not really that different from where I ended up, right? True. You're still manipulating images and color through a filter of light, right? So I think my core fascination is really light and how one interacts with it. It's just using different filters. And so with this project, we have been working to design the proper light sources for this window that will both move and also the tonality. So thinking about where the window originally was installed and the orientation of that window, what would that light have been? Because I'm sure Agnes took that into consideration when she was designing this window. And so I definitely encourage anyone who's thinking about illuminating stained glass, which is notoriously difficult, to consider that, because if you're looking at, and again, this goes back to my education, having the privilege of being able to travel to a place like Holland, which has that, sort of dusty yellow, gray, blue light as illumination, versus somewhere pretty close to the equator. If you're thinking about southern France and what that light looks like, it's more bright orangey yellow and intense and sort of unified and not so toned down. Artists definitely were thinking about that and incorporating that when they were building their windows. And so if you use a light source that was adjusted for working on the equator and you put it on a Dutch window, it's going to blow it out. You can't, all the details are going to be lost. And conversely, if you do that for a piece that was made to have a lot of light going through it and you don't have enough, it's going to read as being too dark. So that's something that I get really excited about. When I was in undergraduate school, I saw my first James Turrell piece, and was blown away by it. And he's still one of my favorite artists. And I think it's because of that manipulation of space to try to harness manipulating light, right? Like we can't really do that, but that's something that really appeals to me.
So do you now, or have you in the past, made personal works in stained glass?
I have.
The quote unquote autonomous panel?
Yes, I have. Not often enough. I did a couple pieces when I was in grad school. I did a transom window early on for a private residence in France. Where I currently am in my studio, there is a Victorian home that's across the street from here. And the owner there commissioned us to make a transom for that home, and that was a piece with roses in it, and it was such a wonderful piece for me to work on. And I told the owner if it could take a little bit longer and I could do all of it myself, I would give him a discount. And the last name of the people has the word wood in it, and it was a husband's gift for his wife, and her first name is Rose, and she had all these beautiful roses in the front part of her house. And so because I could see her go to work every day, it's a very neighborhood tied-in neighborhood where we are. I would look out my window and see when she would go to work, and then I'd run across the street and take photos of her roses. And then this transom is incorporated. It's actually her roses, and it was the cycle of a rose. So it's got rosebuds and seeds and a full bloom rose piece that I did, and then we installed it when she was away at work, and then watched out of the window to see her come home and see it for the first time. So there's that. I really feel like I'm a facilitator when I'm doing art. And I think I've chosen, in one way, my art piece is Nzilani. My art piece is the Philip Foundation. We have a Nzilani rose where each of the petals, it's an old growth redwood, relatively small. I think it's only 7 feet in diameter, rose petal window that each of the petals is done by a different person at Nzilani. So when we have downtimes, I'll coordinate with one of our employees / artists to work on the piece. So I really like to work collaboratively. And then in the building, one of the reasons that I'm so excited that we're moving into this new place is sort of an extension of the Philip Foundation, because we've built all these really great relationships with preservation contractors. And so it's a way to highlight their work in this building. And so we're going to, I've designed a staircase while working with this metal worker who we've worked with a lot of times. We do a lot of lamp refurbishing work. So the lampist, she's going to be doing some some work where I'll be doing the glass components and she's going to rewire some lamp pieces. So I really like the dichotomy of working with found objects and then adding a modern twist on it. And then we're also working with a couple muralists, and one of them, the mural is going to be interpreted in part in a stained glass window. So the mural will go from the wall into stained glass into another part. So I have a lot of projects coming down the pipeline that are there. But I feel like I think I'm a closet architect / interior designer. I really like transforming spaces with glass pieces. So and then we also make vessel pieces as well.
So how do you see your studio and its work evolving in the future?
I see Nzilani continuing in what we have been doing for the last almost 25 years. So providing services for stained glass preservation for institutions and residences, and then working parallel with the Phillips Foundation to provide access to worthwhile historic projects, and also training the next generation in stained glass, both preservation and making new pieces. I really want to. We're really lucky, right? So we're based here in this urban setting of West Oakland that has amazing Victorian homes and buildings that can be repurposed. And sometimes, if we're going back to preservation, talking about a home that has been in a family for 3, 4, 5 generations, how great would it be that the people who now live there, who have this verbal history of what's happening, they can also work on their own buildings, sort of breaking down those barriers. So I think more the next iteration of what I'm doing, what Nzilani and the Phillips Foundation are doing, is again widening that. That's not the right word, but like affording access to what we do to a lot more people.
So how have you driven your studio towards the goal of being at the intersection of equity, preservation, and art? What have been the challenges and the rewards of doing that?
I guess I'll talk about the rewards first and then talk about the challenges therein. So the rewards have been almost infinite, right? Because what I see is through education with a small e, right? So but our mere existence of showing up on a job site and the expectations of who is valued and valuable and competent to do the work that we do. We are a wide variety of folks. Some of us are immigrants. I come from, an immigrant background as well. And seeing that shift from day one of you show up on a job site and people sort of being somewhat, let's say, curious as if we can deliver the job, to week 2 or 3, or if we're working on a larger project, months in, where we can finish each other sentences with other construction companies, and having the shorthand of knowing we can rely upon each other and just get the job done, and not being wary that the other people aren't up to it. That's been really rewarding. Seeing people who don't come to conservation and preservation through what people perceive as traditional training has also been really rewarding. Because for myself, I'm the kind of learner who really loved education, and I thrived and succeeded in education of going, high school, undergrad, grad school, then I worked in some museums, and I started my company. But I also know that some of the skilled most skilled people that we have had grace us with their presence at Nzilani have come to us through different backgrounds. And if I was only looking at paper on their qualifications through that very narrow lens of who is qualified, I wouldn't have even given them the time of day. So I feel like those have been real wins and rewards for us, both them giving us their input and me affording them that opportunity. That's been really great. The flip side, challenges of growing Nzilani have also been what the rewards are, right? So it has been more difficult and it has taken more energy for me to show up at a job site and people to look right past me and say, where's your boss? I am the boss. Yeah, I get that, but who's the real boss? I am the boss. You know, like just having to do that dance, it's tiring. I don't find it, at this point, I don't really find it annoying. I find it amusing, but it does take energy to, you know, have to go through that song and dance and, you know, code switch sometimes and use these keywords so people kind of understand that I'm speaking their language before we actually get to the job. That's a little annoying. Challenges as well of like we were talking about, again, health and safety. I wish there was more support on a local, governmental, federal level for people who want to do well and support their team to have funding to get that done. There have been times where we've had people reach out for summer internships or short time training where we've had the capacity and training. The projects were there, but we haven't had funding to support the people. And as much as I would love to give someone experience, I really do not subscribe to free, non-paid internships. It's just not the way I roll. So we've had to turn people away, even though we've had the desire and they've had the desire to do the work. So that's been one of the key frustrating pieces of wanting to give more and not being able to do that because, you know, we value people enough. And I hope that's been conveyed to the people we've had to say no to. But it is frustrating because I think that the work that we do is really interesting. I think it's valuable to our community and the larger society. And, you know, if I won the lottery tomorrow, I would keep on doing what I was doing. I'd just do it with more people and do more projects. Oh, I guess, you know, if I'm defining who I am, I think what has been challenging, and a lot of people may not understand that if you are a business owner, specifically a small business owner and a single owner of a company, and oftentimes it's been challenging because it's kind of a lonely profession, because you have to think about the business side as well as the project side and how you want to approach things. And I've stopped saying that I'm not a good business owner because I kind of, you know, in order to have this company thrive for close to a quarter of a century, I've got to be doing something right. But I also really like the artistic part of it. And I feel that sometimes people assume if you're good at business or you're good at preservation, you can't also be an artist. So, you know, I wish I could clone myself so I could do a lot more art. And I'm hoping when we move into this new space, so currently where we are, we have 6 different studio spaces that aren't contiguous. We're always kind of like running from one place to another, which is, you know, great for my health of running up and down the stairs every day, often multiple times a day. But moving into this new space where we can have everything together, and we have multiple sets of kilns, I'm hoping that that's going to afford more time for personal creativity and growth, because that's something that's really, really exciting to me. And every time I go to a museum where it's not work, and I can go through galleries, I get really excited by different artists' pieces in all different types of mediums. And so I look forward to revisiting that. But I also realize that I really love collaborative work. I'm very lucky that our studio head here, Ermel LaRue, also is an amazing glass artist in her own right. And so I'm grateful for the friendship that the two of us have had for close to 30 years now, and she's really inspirational to see how she does her own work, and we really like to collaborate together as well, outside of working together at Nzilani. So I really like to that's sort of one of the next things on my horizon is to continue to support and select people who are good within Nzilani and also the Phillip Foundation, so I can make myself slightly more redundant to afford myself more space to do artwork, but also surround myself by all these people who are just so amazing. I'm so grateful that I've stopped saying, I'm going to do this until I find something I really love to do. I think, after 30 years, I think I've locked it in, not meaning that I'm not ready for expanding and for growth, but this is my sweet spot, right? It really is the intersection of art and equity and social justice and doing things with my hands, where there's all this talk about AI is coming for our jobs. I don't really think AI is going to be able to do this type of creative, hands-on, insightful work where you really do have to have this relationship with other people you're working with, and also have a relationship with the clients and really listen and hear what they want in their spaces. I really like meeting people and understanding what their desires are, and not just sort of having this separation of, you come in, you fix something, you leave. All of these relationships that we have make us better people, and we get to learn not only about the history of their building, but the history and the stories of people, and what could be better than that?
Thanks for tuning in to Talking Out Your Glass. Many thanks to our sponsors, without whom these podcasts would not be possible. The American Glass Guild, Toyo's Supercutters, Yakagani Glass, Ed Hoy's International, the Stained Glass Association of America, and Bendheim. Stay tuned for more great episodes, including Jesse Olwyn of Hemlock Stained Glass, Jen Ellick, and Laura Donifer, and many of the artists from her stained glass fashion shows. Follow Talking Out Your Glass on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Until next time, stay glassy.